Now guys, before anything, my golden number one rule is RTFQ. Read the freaking question. Everything begins and ends with the question itself, period. Examiners are not interested in you narrating what happened, your summary of events, or your emotional opinion. They care about one simple professional thing. Are you answering the question set and ticking the boxes of the mark scheme? Now at university level, you might as well get a first for something original, something interesting, your own way of questioning the question itself. For example, if the question is, why is Vladimir Putin popular? And then you ask, wait, is he popular at all? That sort of thing. However, at A level, yes, original critical thinking is going to distinguish your script from other candidates and will make you score high marks to hit the highest mark bands in the mark scheme itself. However, you can get higher marks at A level than you can get at university, because at A level, if you tick all of the boxes of the mark scheme, given that this is impression-based, quite subjective marking, although they do test how you employ change over time, nuance, historical analysis, interpretation, evaluation, and so on. One central thing they're testing is hitting the criteria of the mark scheme. At uni, you can get like 78, which is absolutely brilliant. It is a high first. However, here you can even get near full marks if you hit the criteria of the mark scheme right. So I have to disappoint you, but unfortunately, what is good history might not be equal to a good A-level exam response script, because good history is what you're going to produce once you become an independent scholar, a critical thinker at university. Here, you need to be pragmatic. Here, you need to get as many marks in the bag as possible within the allotted time, which is a difficult task, but I love you all and I believe in you all, and I'm sure you'll do a bloody amazing job in this. So, how to think like a historian. Part A. This is my general system for part A. You need to have a system how you're going to answer the question. So part A, as you hopefully know at this point, it's worth 15 marks, and part B is worth 25 marks for this document question paper. The syllabus will be changing in 2027, but this video is designed for the 2026 examinations. Next year, I might upload also the updated version for the new syllabus, but for the time being, for part A, you need at least 2 agreements and 2 differences. Fast and furious comparison, you have around 20 minutes max in the exam for part A. So you have to use short quotes. Do not regurgitate what the source is saying, for goodness sake. Interpret, analyze. Why? Ask why. Be curious as a historian, passionate. You love your subject. You chose this subject. And there is always a value of analysis below that asks why, which is very important. That is analysis. And you should always analyze in relation to the question, sitting on the question. Guide your examiner through the answer with a clear setting the stage paragraph, a clear outline paragraph, and with argument, evidence, argument, evidence, argument, evidence constantly flowing throughout the essay. All right, so think of it like the old-fashioned, good old history Big Mac hamburger. So you have a bun, you have the meat, you have the lettuce, you have a bun at the bottom. So that's argument, evidence, argument, evidence, argument, evidence. If I went with a marker, with a, let's say, a pink marker and a green marker, and I was highlighting, I constantly want those 2 colors to be alternating. Argument, evidence, argument, evidence. I don't want a whole bunch of argument with no facts, with no quotes, with no statistics. The examiners do not want this for one simple reason. This is an unsupported assertion. This will not get you high marks. The same goes for a rubbish narrative response. Yes, you're telling me what happened, but I don't give a flying F what happened. I care about you taking the advantages and the disadvantages and critically thinking about this. Where do you stand in relation to the question? What is your thesis statement? What is your answer based on weighing all this evidence in terms of relative significance to reach a sustained judgment? This is what matters. Because, as I said, you're doing history at a serious level and you're preparing yourself to become an independent thinker, independent scholar at university, where it will not be as linear, but you'll pick the modules which you're passionate about, and hopefully this A level is also something you're passionate about. However, here it's linear. You have key questions set in the syllabus. You must make sure you are confident in all of the key questions in the syllabus and in all of the assessment objectives. You hopefully know them by now. And in terms of part A, you need short quotes. So don't give me a whole half a page quote. Truncate the quote. It means quotation marks, beginning of quote, first few keywords, ... and then by the end of the quote, the last few keywords. And crucially, always ask why. Why do they agree? Why do they differ? And what explains this? In terms of provenance, I insist on provenance. Nature, origin, purpose, NOP of the source. Analysis is not what the source says. Analysis is why. And always use the phraseology like author X exonerates this guy because, and author Y demonizes the author because, and this brings to the fore this issue which matters to us as historians, which is significant to this historiographical debate because, that sort of thing. So you have a continuum. I drew this continuum down here. So basically, imagine like a number line from 0 to 10, right? It is never totally agree or totally disagree. It's always a shade of gray in between the black and white, in between the two extremes. That's always the continuum. If we draw a number line, 0 is totally disagreeing and 10 is totally agreeing, your answer should, in an ideal world, almost always be somewhere in between, because there are no absolutes in history. Maybe it's a 3, like here. For example, maybe it kind of tenuously agrees, more tends to disagree, but there is still some element of agreement. Maybe it's a 6, somewhere in the middle, but maybe slightly more tending towards the side to agree compared to the side to disagree. And maybe it's an 8. Maybe it strongly agrees, but it also has some elements of disagreement, but they're not very significant, but still they exist. It's always to some extent. That's the phraseology that we're looking like. You should always use like phraseology like this underscores the notion. Furthermore, and then have a link between your paragraphs. You were taught in your schooling up to now, PEEL, point, evidence, explanation, point, explanation, point, evidence, explanation, link. So you need to, all right, point, state your argument, evidence, which quote, fact, statistic supports this point, explanation, why, and then evaluation. Evaluation is basically taking all of your research findings and coming up with a unique, insightful, commendable interpretation of your own. For example, an example of evaluation is, let's say I'll give you an example from A-level economics, for example. A central bank sets interest rate at a particular level with their monetary policy, right? And in real life, the central bank is not going to just flick their finger like this and have the interest rate set at that place and have the policy implemented, and it's not going to instantly see the effects of this policy. The reason is because, all right, fine, you lower interest rates, but you're not instantly going to see an increase in aggregate demand. That is because it takes time in the real world for policies to take effect. That's an evaluation, for example. Or evaluating yes in the short run, but in the long run, y. X in the short run, but in the long run, y. Or for example, yes, but it is difficult for the central bank to set the, to know where exactly to set the interest rate in the real world, right? It doesn't know the exact value. Not a quarter model. Apart interest rate like 4.53% in the real world, how the bloody hell would it know this in an actual real world context? It is a model. They are setting it, but they do not know precisely where to set it. In the real world, like they would in theory, in a theoretical economic model. That sort of thing, that is evaluation. And then always think in terms of changing continuity. This is another key concept in this syllabus. Change over time. Yes, there is a short-term trigger there, i.e. the match that lit the powder barrel, like for example the Archduke being assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914. There were decades of entente cordiale, Moroccan crises, blank check, militarism, imperialism, nationalism, arms race that caused the First World War. But ultimately, the drop which overfilled the already full, almost full to the brim cup was the assassination of the Archduke. So that is the sort of thing, the short-term trigger. And then we have the long-term accumulating causes, which are just set lit in this analogy by one short-term trigger. It's the match that lit the fire barrel. That is what ignited all this, which was compounding and became even more aggravated over the course of decades. And then the background pressure, the context, and the immediate catalyst, what immediately caused rampant escalation of this process. And if you're not thinking in change over time terms, you're really leaving some of the top marks at the top ends of the mark scheme behind. Now, we talked about a history Big Mac sandwich, right? We have argument, evidence, argument, evidence. You never have one whole paragraph of narrative and then one sentence of argument. And as I said, you never have assertions without support. So you always make links between paragraphs for your essay to be coherent, for your essay to be effectively structured, to make your examiner's life easier, because they read hundreds of these things per day and you want to make them like what you have written in terms of getting on their good side. So they instantly think like, all right, I positioned this essay in level 4, level 5, level 6 for the historiography paper 3, but be patient until then, that's going to be next year in A2. And the matter is just where in this level. You instantly want to kind of treat them like they're an idiot. I mean, I don't mean it literally. I respect these professionals, but don't assume you're writing for somebody who knows everything, what you mean implicitly. You always need to explain because. You always need to be specific, to give an example, a deeper layer of why, what do you mean by this? You should not leave things vague and ambiguous. You should make it crystal clear, spell it out for the examiner. Make it obvious to any intelligent person who is reading your work, who doesn't have a clue about history. Make it always clear what you're talking about. That is crucial to guide the examiner through your response. That should be your engine of your response and what ultimately enables you to score high. Now, in terms of these sources, which is what we're here for, and sorry for the lengthy preamble, but I hope that was some useful context and useful insights. What I would say for these sources, first of all, you have 1 hour, 15 minutes. Please, I beg you, spend at least 15 minutes reading the sources at least 2 times carefully. Underline key words. And, for example, source A, the trouble will start with the government being blamed for all disasters. In the legislative institutions, a bitter campaign against the government will begin. This will be followed by revolutionary demonstrations throughout the country. Socialist slogans capable of arousing and rallying the masses will call for first the division of land and then the redistribution of all valuables and property. The defeated army, having lost its most dependable men and carried away by the tide of the primitive peasant desire for land, will find itself too demoralized to defend the law and order. The legislative institutions and the moderate opposition parties, lacking real authority in the eyes of the people, will be powerless to stop the popular tide, and Russia will be flung into hopeless anarchy, the outcome of which cannot be foreseen. Now, this is from a memorandum by the former Minister of the Interior to the Tsar from February 1914. Very important to read the caption at the bottom because it reveals a great deal about the provenance of the source. And source B is then the social revolutionaries view things differently from the social democrats and other left-wing parties. A revolution based on the 1905 model is impossible at present, but a combined revolution between the military and working class masses is more than possible. The success of the propaganda of the social revolutionaries in the army, about which new information is arriving daily, leads us to accept the revolution will be begun by these soldiers formed from yesterday's workers and by those workers who are subjected to the harsh rule of the militaristic police state driven to work by bullets and bayonets. Certain facts such as success in spreading pacifism among the soldiers and the militarized workers, growth of general discontent with the high cost of living and lack of food are true. The social revolutionaries correctly realize that the present moment is most favorable for sowing the seeds of revolution. From an Okhrana, a secret police report from October 1916. And then we have source C. Neither the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks, nor the social revolutionaries led the workers of Petrograd onto the streets. It was someone mightier than they, Tsar hunger. It began with ordinary food riots. The bake shops lacked bread. Long queues, at first chiefly of women and boys, took out their resentment on the bakers, suspecting them of hoarding flour for purposes of speculation. I hope that most of you by now know what speculation means. Speculation is basically stocking a particular good with the hope its price will rise even higher and the demand for it will rise even farther tomorrow or like in the future, and then wanting to sell it once the prices have risen. And you can see why this was so controversial and so hated in this particular historical context. The police restored order. They were greeted with hostile shouts. The people demanded bread. Then naturally they began to shout, "Down with the police!" But no sooner was this echoing through the streets than there appeared to be the old slogans, "Down with the autocracy" and "Down with the war." There were disorders, but there was still no revolution. There was no leader, but every revolutionary and democratic group, organized or unorganized, rushed headlong into the movement, trying to attract as many people as possible and to inspire it with militant political slogans. From an account by a member of the Social Revolutionary Party, Viktor Chernyov, who was in Petrograd during February 1917. Perfect. Now, source D. The movement broke out spontaneously without preparation and exclusively because of the supply crisis, since the military units did not hinder the crowd and in individual cases even took steps to paralyze the actions of the police. The masses gained confidence that they could act without fear of punishment. Now, after 2 days of unimpeded movement on the streets, when revolutionary groups have raised the slogans, "Down with the war" and "Down with the government," the people have become convinced that the revolution has begun, that the masses are winning, and that the authorities are powerless to suppress the movement by virtue of the fact that the military units are not on their side. They believe that history is near because the military, either today or tomorrow, will come out openly on the side of the revolutionary forces, that the movement which has begun will not subside but grow ceaselessly until ultimate victory and the overthrow of the government. From an Okhrana secret police report, February 1917. And now we have to answer both parts of the question with references to the sources. So we need to read sources C and D. How far do sources C and D agree about the events of the February Revolution? That is the 15 marker. And I pasted the extract below from the syllabus on command words. Command words and their meanings help candidates know what is expected from them in their exams. The table below includes command words used in the assessment for this syllabus. The use of the command word will relate to the subject context. All right, so this is helpful to know so you know how to adequately tackle each prompt that potentially appears on the question paper on the day. What I was getting on here is if you write a word, like here I gave the example of cat, please don't scribble all over it. I want to see your process of thinking as an examiner. Just have a clear, neat, straight through line so the examiner can see what you were thinking there. Being neat and having, I know it's difficult within the time constraints, but having decent handwriting will greatly ease the examiner's job of reading your essay, and it is very important for you to write legibly and crystal clear in your A-level. And I don't need to mention this again, but it's so important that I want to reiterate this once more. Please, whenever the examiner is reading any stage of your answer, they always must know at all times what question you're answering. So you need to be laser focused on the question. Before we go into the actual response part for part A, I wanted to just remind you again of the system for answering the part A question. And the system for the part A question, as we said, 2 agreements, 2 differences at minimum in 20 minutes, short quotes, truncate them if necessary, and explain and justify why they agree or disagree. Context, NOP, who wrote the source. So in terms of the contextual knowledge, please get your research questions to the level that you know them inside and out. So somebody wakes you up at 3 in the morning, you must know them like you know the back of your palm. So, what I mean by this, the sources, for example, when I did my A-level back in the day, I sat composite AS and A-level in a single exam series in summer 2024. And my paper 1 had this question on, because I was doing the Great Crash, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's response to the Great Depression. It was a question for part A to compare 2 sources on the sick chicken case. This is only a small section of the textbook, but this is what I'm saying. For these source papers, you arguably must know the context even better, the contextual knowledge, than for the essay papers, because here you're working with the sources are there. First and foremost, you tackle the sources, but in order to analyze in terms of NOP and provenance, you need to know the syllabus content from your research, from the scheme of work, from the links your course convener is providing. You need to know inside and out. You learn while you make notes. It's a neurological process. And you must really know quotes, statistics to get these extra points, and to be able to evaluate in terms of context and in terms of the provenance. Yeah, these 2 sources disagree. But in order to know why they disagree, for goodness sake, you need to know the context or why they agree. It doesn't matter. You need to be able to justify in terms of context and NOP why they differ and why they are similar. Now, one more thing I would suggest for this Fast and Furious comparison. You start with an intro. You have the 2 differences, the 2 similarities, conclusion. As simple as that. And it is most important to have support and challenge and analysis and evaluation in terms of context and evaluation in terms of NOP. It sounds like a lot in only 20 minutes, but trust me, practice makes perfect. Repetitius est mater studiorum. So you must practice with your course conveners as many exam simulations as possible to learn how to think new evaluative ideas within the allotted time. Because think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So at the bottom, you have, now this is adapted for how I see academic responses. At the bottom, you have reproduction. Anyone can regurgitate what has been taught to them. So you don't want to merely have a list of facts. You want to be selective about why something matters, why something was chosen to be written as academic history as opposed to merely being documented as the past. And obviously you need to evaluate reliability, usefulness of the source, and you need to evaluate what was the purpose of the author when they were producing this source. Above reproduction comes analysis. That is why. So explaining why something happened. This happened because author X argues this because, while on the other hand, by contrast, author B, author Y argues, the second author B argues Y because, and they differ because, and this is my view on weighing the advantages and disadvantages of these perspectives. That sort of thing is what we are looking for. And then you have evaluation, which is your unique contribution, your kind of mini conclusion based. Each paragraph must have a mini thesis statement and a mini conclusion. This is what comes above analysis, based on drawing on everything you have researched and found out so far. And then at the top comes creativity. Now, this is the domain of meta historiography. It is good to show some dose of originality, but please remain loyal to ticking the boxes of the mark scheme at this stage. But this was just an illustration which I hope was helpful to see what is counted as a high-level indicator is history as opposed to narration, what everybody can do. Repeat the year when something happened or just state a fact from history. You should not take things at face value. You should always analyze the deeper meaning below, the why. You should evaluate. So, one more thing I wanted to mention is grade thresholds. Yes, they are lower than the universal percentage uniform mark range, usually because they depend on the difficulty of the paper and how the cohort performed, and then the marks are placed on a bell curve, and that's how they statistically, through statistical analysis, determine the grade thresholds. Don't worry about the thresholds. Just make sure that even under the strictest marker, you can gain 80% and above, and that cannot be justifiably marked as lower than 80% under any marker on God's green earth. So you want to get 80% and above consistently, and in that way, no matter the thresholds, even though they're usually lower, you will get the grade, the A or the A star you deserve if you keep to this universal percentage uniform mark range that Cambridge set. Now, when you get your results, I won't spend too much time on this because we really shouldn't obsess over grades and over thresholds. We should really focus on doing the best we can in the allotted time and giving our best, the fullest of our potential, the fullest of our capacities. But basically, you get a grade A. So you're right on the grade A threshold, like 1 mark below would be a B, 1 mark above, you would move further 1 more mark towards the A star threshold. That is a PUM of 80. It's a low A. Then if you scored a B, but it is exactly halfway between the grade B and the grade A threshold, that's a PUM of 75. It means a middle grade B. And if you scored, let's say 69, which in an ideal world, God forbid you will score a 69. I know that you are capable of the highest possible, best possible performance and success. But let's say hypothetically a candidate scores a 69, that means they were 1 mark short of something like that of the grade B threshold, and they have a very high C grade. So they are well above the C threshold, but 1 mark short or something like that of the B threshold, hence a percentage uniform mark of 69. So that is how percentage uniform marks and thresholds work with Cambridge. I hope this clarified any confusion you might have about assessment results and reporting. But long story short, always aim for 80% and above to be on the safe side. For some syllabi, such as A-level mathematics, you must aim for even like 90% or something like that, because in the February-March series, although I know most of you are sitting the May-June series, thresholds can be insanely high if a paper is easy. The same way they can be disproportionately low if a paper is disproportionately difficult. So to be on the safe side in your assessments, in the humanities subjects, obviously, where simply there is no such thing as 100%, because we, on average, the bright, beautiful field of history awards high marks in general. But they never award the top, like 100% marks. This is because, unlike in the empirical sciences where it is either true or false, here there are no absolutes. Here it is always a matter of to what extent. And that is the beauty of history, because you can argue literally anything. I mean, you cannot argue something that is blatantly controversial and false, but you can make a plausible line of argument as long as you can justify it with evidence and with an explanation. You can score high. So it's about originality, about kind of making your spark for the subject, making your way of thinking. We are looking for your way of thinking. As I'm referring to the Cambridge examiners, obviously I'm a fellow student, but Cambridge examiners are looking for your way of thinking, your chain of reasoning above all. And that is what will get you into the top mark bands. So long story short, aim for excellent marks and don't satisfy yourself with anything lower than 80% if you're aiming for an A or an A star, which is in reach for all of you if you frequently do the assignments your course convener sets, if you attend the classes regularly, if you listen and take notes, and if you apply these strategies. I hope all of this stuff is helpful, because 70% of things you learn from listening first time from the lecturer. So make sure to attend your lectures, your tutorials, i.e. in secondary school, your lessons, your classes, and to take notes and to make the notes analytical and pragmatic in the purpose of scoring high marks and developing your thinking as a historian, your analysis, your evaluation in the exam. I'll come back to the key questions in a second. I just want to read the part A response. So always write the question before you start answering it. That way you'll make sure you're always writing things that are relevant to the question. So it takes literally a few seconds, yet it means a great deal. So to clarify our sources, C and D agree about the events of the February Revolution. Please always have a plan, because things which are planned well can hardly go wrong. And when the examiner opens your script and sees a plan, they instantly know, all right, so this person knows what they're doing. So you shouldn't write Tolstoy's War and Peace. You shouldn't reinvent hot water. You should simply just write agreements, ba ba ba. So in this case, both argue that events started spontaneously. Both underscore the notion that food shortages caused unrest. Both mention anti-war slogans. Then in terms of your differences, you say C says no real revolution yet. D argues people believe revolution had actually started. In source C, the military is not very important. In source D, the military mostly refused to help the police. And why do they disagree? Because source C is an SR witness, emphasizes spontaneity, and source D, secret police looking for threats. So in terms of the response, this is my attempt at this question. I wrote something along the lines of, sources C and D agree to a large extent that February Revolution began spontaneously and was driven by economic hardship, especially food shortages. Bam! Straight into the question. We don't want clearing your throat. That might be good in a rhetorical speech, but in an exam response, straight to the point. In source C, Chernov states that events began with ordinary food riots. Quote, they're absolutely essential. You gotta engage with the evidence that is given in front of you, the source itself. And bread shortages, showing that hunger, not political planning, was the principal cause of unrest. In a similar fashion, source D explains that the movement broke out without preparation, supply crisis. So this is again truncating quotes. This is what I meant by this example. In a clear-cut manner, agreeing that material conditions were the immediate cause. I also marked the script according to the mark scheme, so I will guide you through my application of the mark scheme as soon as I finish this response, what was good about it, what needs to be improved. Both sources also argue that slogans developed as events escalated. Source C demonstrates a progression from bread to down with the war and finally down with the autocracy, suggesting political radicalization after the protests began. Source D confirms this by stating that revolutionary slogans such as down with the war and down with the government appeared only after crowds gained confidence. This supports the idea that political aims followed rather than caused the initial unrest. However, the sources differ on the extent to which the events had become a revolution. Source C argues that there was still no revolution and emphasizes the lack of leadership, asserting that political groups rushed to join events already in motion. By contrast, Source D suggests that the population had become convinced that the revolution has begun and that the overthrow of the government was near. This shows disagreement over how revolutionary the situation already was. A further difference concerns the role of the military. In source C, the military is largely absent and the police are initially able to restore order. In source D, however, military units actively undermine the police and largely refuse to suppress crowds, which encourages the belief that victory was imminent. This difference could potentially be explained by the provenance, the nature, origin, and purpose of the source. Source D is an Okhrana report likely to be focused in depth on threats to state power and thus bringing to the fore military unreliability, while source C, on the other hand, was produced by a social revolutionary who stresses spontaneity as well as lack of organization. Overall, in conclusion, sources C and D to a large extent agree on causes in early development but differ on the extent of revolutionary consciousness and state collapse. That's it. Your conclusion should restate thesis in new and fresh way. It should conclude with a forward-looking view. And don't bring new stuff into the conclusion, and for goodness sake, please don't give me a summary of the essay. I don't want stuff that I already know. I want your critical thinking. Where do you stand in relation to this research question? All right, so just to briefly guide you through the annotations that I put on the script, this is what examiners use to annotate their script when you get them back from Cambridge. So this is obviously spontaneously driven and was driven by economic hardship, especially food shortages. This is a similarity. Slogans developed. This is a similarity. Still no revolution, and the revolution has begun. This whole paragraph kind of is a difference. And a further difference concerns the role of the military in source C. The military is largely absent, and the police. This is again a difference. So I placed this response into level 4. I think it reaches level 4, makes a developed comparison between the two sources, explains why points of similarity and difference exist through contextual awareness and or source evaluation. You should hopefully by now be familiar with these generic mark schemes and mark bands that are used to mark your work, that examiners use to mark your work by now. So here in part A, you have the, so this is my comment. This is something along the lines what the examiner would write in the margin next to your script. Response clearly meets level 4 criteria because it makes a developed comparison, explains why points of similarity and difference exist. However, it does not reach the very top of the level because the explanation of why the sources differ could be more fully developed and more tightly linked to the context. Provenance used, but could be further developed in context. So as a result, this is a level 4, and I'm quite a harsh marker. Don't get pessimistic. I'm always somebody who likes to be positive about the outcome, but for the simple reason that it is better that no matter what examiner you get, you want to score well. It is better to be slightly stricter and eternally grumpy about your work now than to be too lenient now. You should be positively surprised by results in the actual exam, and you should think that the real thing is very easy when you walk into it, and not vice versa in an ideal world. Now, in terms of part B, we better move on because I want to get everything covered in a concise manner that is going to be most helpful and efficient for you guys. So in terms of part B, you must use all sources. You don't use all sources, it's not well-rounded coverage of the question of the thesis. You will not get the mark that you want, period. So show support and challenge for the statement at hand and evaluate, i.e. say which source is stronger and why. You saw the writing style. Of course, you shouldn't go over the top with fancy words because we ultimately care about the clarity of the argument and about it being clearly expressed. So a good writing style, yes, it is desirable, but above all, the quality of the argument. But the quality of the argument and the writing style, they're kind of go hand in hand. They have to exist both together in conjunction, in concordance. In terms of following the words of the mark scheme and ending with a clear verdict and judgment, this is the key word, judgment. So basically, how you should treat part B. Part A was a fast and furious compare and contrast exercise, but part B, it's... Now, on that note, before I end, the kind of bonus part is to see the assessment objectives from the syllabus itself and the key questions, because I think this is absolutely crucial in order to score high in this. B is not a summary, it's a judgment, it's a courtroom model. You imagine you're a judge and you have 4 pieces of evidence. And you weigh these pieces of evidence. You compare their advantages versus their limitations. You question the question itself. This is where it is good to show critical independent thinking as a historian by questioning the question itself. You ask, is the war really the main cause? Or is that merely too simplistic of a view? Now, question the question. The question says the demand for revolutionary change was brought about the First World War. Was it? Or did really the war just intensify deeper structural issues? This is where you show maturity as a historian, as a thinker. And you need to have nuance, you need to have the why, you need to have the historian mindset. So ultimately your introduction should always define key terms and define criteria how you will answer the question. This is absolutely essential. In order to score high marks. I cannot overemphasize this enough. So, my response to the question, the demand for revolutionary change was in Russia was brought about by the First World War, goes as follows. The sources A to D provide partial support for the view that the First World War brought about the demand for revolutionary change, but overall suggest that the war functioned more in the form of a background accelerator rather than being the main cause. Pause. Hang on a minute. This is the essence. You need to get the core thesis and that starting sentence to hook your reader, make their life easier. This guy or girl knows what they're doing by instantly attacking the question, instantly giving your answer in the first paragraph. That's your introduction. Then you say, and you should have obviously introduction, set an outline, a roadmap, and a through line, a clear line of argumentation that guides your reader throughout, and that at all times the examiner should know what you are arguing. There is support to some extent for the statement that the demand for revolutionary change in Russia was brought about by the First World War. Causation is another key concept in the advanced study of history at an advanced, sophisticated professional level. Source A connects war to the collapse of authority, arguing that the defeated army would be too demoralized to defend law and order. This carries with itself the implication that the failure of the military during the war weakened the regime's ability to survive periods of crisis. Furthermore, source B also links war to revolutionary potential, noting the spread of pacifism among the army units as well as the growing discontent, which was largely caused by food shortages and the high cost of living. These adverse conditions were ultimately further exacerbated by demonstrating that opposition to the war established and formed one of the components that constituted popular demands in February 1917. However, all sources A to D also challenge the idea that the war alone caused revolutionary demands. Source XC explicitly argues that hunger, as opposed to factors such as ideology or war planning, was the primary trigger, describing the events as driven by Tsar hunger. Although anti-war slogans were appearing, Chernyov stresses that these slogans were quite old and obsolete and fundamentally not the immediate cause of protest. Source C similarly treats the war as a secondary factor, emphasizing the supply crisis and the behavior of the army rather than wartime ideology. It exemplifies that revolutionary groups were essentially exploiting already existing discontent rather than creating discontent from scratch. This opposes the idea that the war in a direct fashion produced revolutionary demand. Evaluation strengthens this conclusion. Source A was written by Durnovo, a conservative minister opposed to war. This is the context I'm talking about. You need to know this from the contextual knowledge from your research, in line with the syllabus key questions. At university, you're an independent researcher, you formulate your own research question, but here, tough luck, you need to prepare based on the key questions given in the syllabus. This is all interesting, intellectually stimulating, thought-provoking, but university is really where it gets fun and interesting when you, as a clever historian, get the freedom to explore in terms of methodology, in terms of the research question, in terms of the historiography, the areas, the historical problems, the historical controversies that interest you the most. So, source D similarly treats the war as a secondary factor, emphasizing, so source A was written by Durnova, a conservative minister opposed to war, which in main fact explain why he exaggerated the dangers involved. Sources B and D are Okhrana reports, which had the purpose of detecting revolutionary threats and making them sensitive to instability, which was typical in the conditions that existed in this time period and in this case study. However, an additional crucial aspect includes the fact that these Okhrana reports also made these revolutionary threats potentially very much prone to overemphasizing revolutionary intent. Source C is especially valuable, useful, and insightful for us as historians because Chernyov, an SR, downplays the role of his own party and portrays the revolution as spontaneous, thus boosting its credibility. In conclusion, the sources overall indicate that the First World War contributed to instability as well as intensified existing problems, but they, broadly speaking, do not corroborate the argument that this is phraseology the examiners love. Corroborate the argument. For example, always be nuanced. That this was the sole main cause of the revolutionary demand. Ultimately, in some economic collapse, starvation, and state losing authority essentially appear as being more fundamental. Now, I know that there is more modern historiography with authors such as Sarah Maza, for example, writing her brilliant work in 2017, thinking about history. There are many historians you should read in terms of historiography and the science of how history is actually done. Including Mark Bloch, including E.H. Carr, including the father of modern history, V.S. Eigentlich gewesen, writing history how it actually was, Leopold von Ranke. But ultimately, I think a good quote, it's note that it was written in 1961, which is 65 years ago. E.H. Carr said, a historian is like a fishmonger on a fishing slab. You throw your hook into the ocean, and with the bait on the hook, you catch the fish, and then you choose which parts of the ocean, i.e. what sources to mine, you choose what's in your bibliography, you choose which case studies, you choose which oral histories, which statements, which testimonies, and you take the facts. Being a historian, it's not merely, it differs from being a history student, because the moment you become a historian, one of, let's say, the indications that after which you might call yourself a historian, is after you sat in the archive for hours going through endless reams of sources, discarding a bunch of the sources because they have nothing to do with your research question, but you check them just in case, and then selecting the few sources that you want to use in your research and to write your academic paper. That is exactly what you're starting kind of to develop here before university, and to develop further through your undergraduate and your master's degree, hopefully with God's will, is to take the fish from the ocean in the part that you choose to fish in, you process them as the historian, you interpret them, you analyze them, you evaluate them, so you cook them at home, and then you sell the fish at the market, i.e. you have your interpretation, your own contribution to the field, your own scholarly literature that you write on this particular historical problem, theme, issue. Now, in part B, you can either thematically group, like you can either, you should always answer questions thematically, but here you have both approaches. Really choose one which A, your course convener tells you to choose, and B, which one you feel more comfortable with. The two approaches are grouping sources in for and against, and then arguing for and against, like by grouping the sources, or you can just go source by source, where you need to analyze the source, its provenance, evaluate the source, attempt source evaluation, and develop an insightful and intelligent evaluation. And yeah, so this methodology of VHCAR, it's ultimately who decides what is history and what is merely the past. Who decides what ends up in the annals of history. And these are what should be in the history curriculum. These are big questions you'll explore at further education level. For now, you should just bear in mind that there are, in preparation for university, that there are historians from above, with the great men of history, the Napoleons, the Josephs II, the Bismarcks and the alike, and then you have the grassroots history as advocated by brilliant historian Eric Hobsbawm, which focuses on history from below, because these people who gave legitimacy to their leaders that are brought to the fore, yes, that is why it's not good to call them ordinary people. They're not ordinary people. They're not merely knots in a big machinery. They are the millions, the valuable people, the human beings who brought their leaders to power, and who brought this historical order to its current status quo, the situation as it currently is. Anyways, sorry if we went sorry for the slight digression. I hope that was useful. Now, let's look at this response. I would say this is a sound response. However, it has quite significant room for improvement, in my opinion. Yes, this pacifism and high cost of living, and now with the war, it shows support. Defeated army shows support. Tsar Hungary in this whole paragraph fundamentally shows challenge, as well as source D similarly treats the war as a secondary factor, and this paragraph, it kind of adds an element to challenge. The judgment is clear-cut, but there needs to be a more explicit, a more obvious weighing of sources, which would strengthen this further. So to unpack this further in terms of explicitly weighing the sources. So I would give this a mark of 20. Why? Because yes, maybe an exceptionally generous marker would put this in level 5, evaluates the sources to reach a supported judgment, answers overall focus, demonstrating clear understanding of the sources in the question, reaches a supported judgment about the extent to which the sources support the statement, and weighs the evidence in order to do this. However, I chose to put this into level 4 because, as I said, it is better to be fair and strict. So using evaluation of the sources to support and or challenge a statement, here we have both support and challenge in this response we're now commenting on, demonstrates a clear understanding of how the source content supports and challenges a statement, evaluates source material in context. This may be through considering the nature, origin, and purpose of the sources in relation to the statement. I obviously gave this, when these marks add up, 12 plus 20, 32 marks overall. It's a grade A, percentage uniform mark of 80, so a low grade A on the boundary of a grade B, but it's still a grade A, and in an ideal world, we would implement this feedback to make these responses even stronger. In terms of my final comment, what kind of the examiner would write is the candidate's response to question 1, including parts A and part B, demonstrates a strong and well-focused understanding of the sources in the questions. In part A, the candidate makes a clear and relevant comparisons, identifying both similarities and differences and supporting them with accurate source content. There is effective use of provenance, nature, origin, and purpose to explain why the sources differ, although this could be developed further to reach the very top of the level. In part B, the candidate provides a balanced and well-structured answer. A balanced argument is a key aspect which we should strive to achieve. We should always bear this in mind, using all 4 sources to both support and challenge the statement. A supported argument is reached and source evaluation is relevant and focused. However, to improve further and penetrate into level 5, evaluation should be more consistently integrated throughout the answer and the relative weight of individual sources made more explicit. I don't like the fact how the evaluation came down to really 1 paragraph. I would like if it was integrated consistently throughout. And in sum, this is a strong response which comfortably reaches the higher levels of the mark scheme. All right. So now what I would say, let's go through A and B once again to make sure we covered everything. Obviously, we should not be too perfectionist, but I want to make this as reliable and helpful for you as possible. So in terms of question A, I would say, the nuance is what separates a B answer from an A star answer. That's what we have talked about. Because historians think in shades of gray, yes. There should be, all right, we went through questions A and B. And I mean, your identity section, apart from ticking boxes, you're really here to think a layer below. Always ask why, always be curious. There is always a layer below. Ask why it matters to us as historians, connect evidence, weigh factors, produce judgment. Also nuance, evaluate in terms of short-term, long-term, history from above, history from below, the elites versus the other groups of society. And I hope I expressed myself right, because I don't like the term ordinary people, because all of these are valuable human beings who have a say in history. And they're not asking, the examiner is not asking, can you think like a historian? The examiner is not asking, do you know what happened? They're asking, can you think like a historian? Because the difference between a history student and a historian is judgment, curiosity, a layer below the layer which we already explored, a layer below a layer which we have already touched upon, sort of thing. And this is what distinguishes an A from an A star. And these are grade A responses which I showed, not quite A star yet, because evaluation is not fully integrated throughout. Please make sure you have an essay plan developed for all of these 4 key questions. This is absolutely essential, because in some shape or form, all of the questions that will be asked for the assessment for this syllabus will revolve around these key questions. So develop an argument, a stance in relation to the following, and you should make essay plans, and you should be confident in answering in all of these areas covered by the syllabus. The assessment objectives are AO1, recall, select, and deploy historical knowledge appropriately and effectively. So I don't want a whole bloody summary of what happened in the 1930s work of the League of Nations and international relations. I want focused historical knowledge which is used to corroborate an argument and which is used appropriately, selectively. That's the key. The key mindset here. AO2 is demonstrate an understanding of the past through explanation, analysis, and a substantiated judgment of key concepts, causation, consequence, continuity, change, and significance within a historical context, the relationship between key features and characteristics of the period studied. So change over time, always asking why. We kind of went through this. If you have any more questions, please drop them in the comment section, or you can contact me via email. I'll put my email in the description. I'm more than happy. It'll be my honor and pleasure to help in any way that suits you best. AO3, analyze, evaluate, interpret a range of an appropriate source material. This is what is asked for in paper 1. Largely, and AO4, analyze and evaluate how aspects of the past have been interpreted and represented. That's paper 3, Cold War historiography, so be patient until next year. Of course, we will cover that in future video walkthroughs and tutorials and lectures. However, for the time being, let's look at the weighting, how much this is weighted in the EAS and in the A level. All right, so AO1, 40% AS level, AO2, 30% in AS level, AO3 is 30% of it in AS level, and there is no historiography, i.e. no Cold War historiography and post-revisionism, revisionism, post-revisionism, and traditional Orthodox school of thought in papers 1 and 2. This constitutes the total of AS level, 40, 30, 30. Assessment objectives, a percentage of each component. For paper 1 specifically, we will go through this when we do a walkthrough to paper 2, paper 3, and paper 4. If you want this, please request any paper, any topic. We can literally do anything that will be helpful for you. Just please drop some ideas and suggestions in the comment section, and it will be my honor and pleasure to make them, to transform them into reality and to make resources and materials that are useful for both course conveners and my fellow scholars, students. So AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4, there is 25% of AO1, contextual knowledge, 75% analyzing sources and interpreting sources and evaluating. All right, so I think it's good to call it a day there. I think that's all for today. I genuinely hope you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, I warmly recommend, I strongly encourage you to post any questions you have in the comment section or to contact me via email. And I am doing private tuition, and I can also be available to meet in person if any of you guys want. So I wish you all the best. Good luck with your exams. I believe in you. I'm happy for you that we are exploring together the beauties of history, and not just history, but how to be independent, open-minded, and make a positive contribution to future society. And education is all about that, building your own originality, your own critical thinking, your dignity, and humanities, as the word itself might suggest, are designed to humanize you, to make you a better human. All of you are beautiful humans, and I love you all. All of you are beautiful people. I love you all, ladies and gentlemen. And with God's will, all of this will go amazing, and you will achieve the top results you have been working so brilliantly and so hard for. On that note, if you like the video, please appreciate the video with a like, share, and subscribe. I hope you found this helpful and useful. And I wish you all the best. Have a good day. I love you all to the moon and back. I wish you lots of good luck, good health, success, happiness, and take care. All the best, and see you in the next video. Cheers. Bye bye.